It was a crisp autumn afternoon in New York City, and Trump Tower stood tall and proud against the skyline. The massive, reflective glass building gleamed in the sunlight, casting a mirror image of the bustling streets below. Inside, the air was filled with the sound of heels clicking against the polished marble floors, the soft hum of conversation, and the steady rhythm of business being conducted in one of the world's most iconic landmarks. Ivanka Trump, the eldest daughter of President Donald Trump, walked through the lobby of Trump Tower with her usual poise. She was dressed in a sleek, tailored black dress, her blonde hair flowing gracefully down her back. As an executive at the Trump Organization, she had grown accustomed to the luxury and sophistication that came with her family's name. But today, something was different. She had received a message earlier that morning about a meeting with a major investor, a routine task that she had done 1,000 times. But as she entered the main lobby, her attention was suddenly drawn to an unsettling scene that was unfolding near the elevators. At first, it seemed like a typical business exchange. A man, clearly in his late 50s, was standing with a younger worker in front of him. The worker, a man in his mid-30s, appeared to be in a wheelchair, his body stiff with the effects of a severe disability. Ivanka's eyes immediately narrowed as she noticed the man in the wheelchair flinch. The tone of the exchange between the two men was harsh, and the words being exchanged were increasingly aggressive. "Move faster. I don't have all day," the CEO shouted, his voice rising in volume with every passing second. Ivanka's heart sank. She knew the man. He was a well-known CEO of a major tech company. Wealthy, influential, and used to getting what he wanted. But what disturbed her more was the way he was speaking to the disabled worker. The worker, clearly struggling to keep up with the demands of his boss, seemed to shrink under the weight of the verbal assault. "I said move now," the CEO continued, his face flushed with anger. "You're a burden on this company. I've got deadlines to meet and you're holding me back." The disabled worker, visibly shaken, attempted to respond, but his words were stammered and weak. I'm doing my best, sir. I'm sorry." Ivanka's instincts kicked in. Her father had always taught her to stand up for what was right, no matter the situation. And this was wrong. The way the CEO was belittling the worker, mocking his disability, was beyond unacceptable. She had seen her fair share of corporate egos and power struggles, but this was something else. Her steps quickened as she walked toward the two men. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, her blood rising with every step she took. Ivanka was no stranger to confrontation, but this was something personal. It wasn't just business, it was about basic human decency. "Excuse me," Ivanka called out, her voice calm but firm. The CEO turned around, a look of surprise crossing his face as he recognized her. His anger momentarily faltered. "Ivanka Trump," he said, his voice softening, but the disdain was still evident in his tone. "I didn't expect you to be here. I was just about to say the same to you," Ivanka replied, her eyes never leaving the CEO's. She stood tall, unwavering in her stance. "It seems there's a little misunderstanding going on here." The worker in the wheelchair, who had been silently trying to shrink away from the confrontation, now seemed to shrink even further. He was clearly embarrassed, caught between the wealthy CEO and Ivanka Trump, his discomfort palpable. "You're making him uncomfortable," Ivanka continued, her gaze now moving to the disabled worker. "You're making all of us uncomfortable, actually, and that's not okay." The CEO's face reddened, his pride bruised. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just giving him some tough love. He needs to shape up if he wants to keep his job." Ivanka's expression hardened. "This isn't tough love. This is bullying. And it ends now." The CEO scoffed, clearly not used to being spoken to this way. "And what do you think you can do about it, huh? I run a multi-billion-dollar company, Ivanka. I'm used to getting what I want." "I'm sure you are," Ivanka said, her voice icy now. "But this is my father's building and I don't tolerate that kind of behavior under my roof." The tension in the air was thick. Ivanka stood her ground, the weight of the situation sinking in. She wasn't going to let this man get away with demeaning a worker simply because he was in a position of power. This was more than a corporate dispute, it was a matter of principle. The CEO, realizing he was losing ground, began to fumble with his words. I wasn't trying to be cruel. Ivanka cut him off. "It's too late for apologies. This is about respect. For yourself, for others, and for the people who work for you." With those final words, Ivanka turned to the disabled worker, offering him a gentle smile. "Are you okay?" The worker looked up, his eyes wide with gratitude. He nodded slowly, the tension in his body easing. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice filled with emotion. The lobby of Trump Tower had gone silent, save for the soft echo of Ivanka's words. The CEO, who had been so confident moments ago, now stood frozen, his eyes shifting from Ivanka to the worker and back again. The intensity of the situation was undeniable, but for a brief moment, it was as if the world had stopped, waiting for something to break the tension. Ivanka didn't take her eyes off the CEO, who seemed to shrink in front of her. His arrogance, the same arrogance that had driven him to belittle a vulnerable employee, now seemed to melt away in the face of her calm authority. The contrast between Ivanka's composed demeanor and the CEO's flustered state was striking. It was as though she had diffused the power dynamic with nothing more than her presence. The worker in the wheelchair shifted slightly, trying to adjust his position. Ivanka could see the relief in his face. Relief that came not just from the fact that the confrontation was over, but from the knowledge that someone had stood up for him. She felt a surge of pride for him, knowing that in that moment he had been seen. But the battle wasn't over. The CEO wasn't ready to admit defeat just yet. "You can't just lecture me, Ivanka," he finally muttered, his voice low but defensive. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Running a business like mine, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. People need to toughen up if they want to make it." Ivanka's gaze didn't waver. "I understand more than you think," she replied coolly. "I know what it's like to be in a position of leadership. I also know that being a leader means having empathy, not exploiting people's weaknesses for personal gain." The CEO let out a sharp breath, his face flushed with indignation. But this time it wasn't directed at Ivanka. It was at himself. He was realizing that his actions had been wrong, and for someone who had built his empire by intimidating others, that was a bitter pill to swallow. "I'm sorry," the worker spoke up, his voice a little more steady now. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. I just want to do my job and not get in the way." Ivanka's expression softened and she knelt down beside the worker, making sure to keep her tone warm and encouraging. "You're not in the way. You deserve to be treated with respect just like anyone else. Don't ever let anyone make you feel less than that." The worker's eyes glistened as he nodded, the gratitude in his gaze evident. Ivanka offered him a reassuring smile before turning her attention back to the CEO. "Now," she said, standing up straight once more, "I think you need to reconsider your approach to leadership. Maybe it's time you learn a few lessons in humility." The CEO, now fully aware of the gravity of the situation, hesitated. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his suit jacket, trying to regain some semblance of control. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. For the first time in a long while, he was speechless. "I'm not interested in your apology," Ivanka continued, her voice unwavering. "What matters now is how you move forward. If you truly want to lead, you need to start by understanding your employees, not dominating them. And that means treating them with dignity, no matter their background or abilities." For a moment, the CEO remained silent, his jaw clenched. Then, finally, he nodded, though it was clear that his pride had been bruised. "I'll think about what you've said," he muttered, his voice barely audible. Ivanka gave him a measured look, her gaze cold and unyielding. "I hope you do. For your sake, and for the sake of those who work for you." Without another word, Ivanka turned to the worker. "You're free to go. I'll make sure your situation is handled properly. No one should be treated like that, especially not in this building." The worker's face lit up, and he slowly wheeled away, his hands shaking slightly with a mixture of relief and disbelief. Ivanka watched him for a moment, her heart swelling with a quiet satisfaction. She had done what needed to be done, not just for the worker but for the integrity of the place she had grown up in. As the worker disappeared down the hallway, Ivanka turned back to the CEO. The exchange had shifted the dynamics of their interaction entirely. The balance of power had been recalibrated. What had started as a confrontation had now become a lesson in leadership, empathy, and justice. "You don't need to worry about him," Ivanka said coolly, her tone leaving no room for argument. "But you do need to worry about yourself. You might run a company, but if you continue to act like this, you'll find yourself alone at the top. And trust me, that's not a place anyone wants to be." The CEO swallowed hard, his face now devoid of his earlier arrogance. He didn't respond, but the change in his demeanor was telling. It was as if the mirror Ivanka had held up to him had finally forced him to see the truth. Ivanka turned on her heel, her stride purposeful as she made her way toward the elevator. She had come to Trump Tower for business, but she was leaving with something far more important, the knowledge that she had made a difference. And in a world where power often went unchecked, she had shown that justice could still prevail. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime and Ivanka Trump stepped inside, her thoughts racing as the soft hum of the lift filled the space. As the elevator descended, she couldn't help but replay the confrontation over and over in her mind. It had been a simple interaction, but the weight of it had left a profound impact on her. The memory of the CEO's flustered expression and the workers' quiet gratitude lingered in her mind. The Trump Tower lobby was still busy as Ivanka walked out of the elevator and into the sprawling lobby once more. She could hear the hushed conversations of the employees, the clinking of coffee cups, and the murmur of city life beyond the walls of the skyscraper. The humdrum of everyday life continued, but for Ivanka, the moment she had just experienced felt like a turning point, not just in the building, but in her own personal journey. Her father, President Donald Trump, had always emphasized power and success. But today, she had chosen to wield her influence differently. It wasn't about building more wealth or pushing a corporate agenda. Today, it was about doing the right thing. Standing up for someone who didn't have the same privileges she did. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking her reverie. She pulled it out, glancing at the notification. It was a message from her father's office. Meeting in 30 minutes. Be ready, Dad. Ivanka's lips curled into a small smile. She had her work to do, but something told her that this interaction had changed her more than she expected. She didn't waste time reflecting too much, however. She had a family business to run and responsibilities to fulfill. As she made her way toward the exit of Trump Tower, she glanced at the gleaming glass windows that stretched above her. In those few moments, she felt a sense of pride for what had just occurred. It was only when she stepped out onto the busy streets of Manhattan that Ivanka realized something profound. She had never really seen her own power more clearly than she did now. It wasn't just in the boardrooms, the meetings, or the business deals. It was in moments like this. The ability to make someone feel seen. To remind people of their worth no matter their background. She had just done that. And it had changed everything. Later that afternoon, as Ivanka sat in the large conference room of Trump Tower, the door opened and the CEO from earlier walked in, his steps hesitant. He wasn't alone. Behind him, he was accompanied by a middle-aged woman dressed in a simple yet elegant blouse and skirt. The woman had a calm, composed air about her, and she smiled warmly as she took a seat across from Ivanka. Miss Trump, the CEO began, his voice now much quieter and more respectful than it had been earlier. I wanted to come here to speak with you directly. And this is Eleanor Wilson, he added, gesturing toward the woman beside him. She's an expert in corporate ethics and leadership training. I've realized that I need to change how I approach my role as a leader. I owe that to the people who work for me. Ivanka's eyes narrowed in curiosity. It wasn't often that someone like him would openly admit their mistakes, especially not in front of an audience. Eleanor Wilson extended her hand, which Ivanka shook without hesitation. I've been brought in to help implement a comprehensive training program for the company's leaders. We'll focus on empathy, understanding, and creating a more supportive work environment. The goal is to ensure that no one is ever treated the way that worker was treated today. We need to build a better culture. Ivanka looked at the CEO, who was now seated with his head lowered. I'm glad to hear that, she replied with a nod. Because what happened today wasn't just about one man and his disability. It was about the culture you've built and the one you need to change. The CEO nodded slowly, and for the first time, Ivanka saw a glimmer of sincerity in his eyes. It wasn't just an apology for show. It was a genuine understanding that something needed to be done. We're going to work on this, Eleanor said, her voice firm but kind. It's about making sure that leadership isn't just about results, it's about the people who help get you there. The people you lead. Ivanka took a deep breath, allowing herself a moment of quiet reflection. She had helped change something. Not by force, but by holding space for someone who needed to be heard. And now it looked like that change was starting to take root. The meeting ended on a hopeful note, with a plan to bring about cultural reforms. The CEO left with a sense of accountability and the quiet confidence that perhaps, just maybe, he was ready to grow. As Ivanka returned to her office, she glanced at the window, watching the skyscrapers towering over the city. She could hear the familiar sounds of the city outside, but something inside her had shifted. Her day had started like any other, but she had left her mark on it. She had reminded herself of something crucial. True leadership wasn't about power. It was about the ability to influence others positively and to leave a lasting impact for good. The next few days felt like a whirlwind. Ivanka's actions had set off a ripple effect within Trump Tower. Word spread quickly about the confrontation in the lobby, the confrontation between the arrogant CEO and the disabled worker, and Ivanka's firm stand for justice. The event had left an impression not just on the people involved, but on the entire organization. Ivanka noticed it first during her meetings. Employees who once kept to themselves now spoke up more. They weren't just voicing their opinions on business matters, they were voicing concerns, suggestions, and asking for changes in the workplace culture. It seemed as though her actions had created a shift in how people viewed power and how they were treated. As the days passed, Ivanka kept in touch with the worker from the incident named Jason. He had called her the morning after the confrontation to thank her for stepping in. Jason had been a janitor at Trump Tower for over a decade, but it wasn't just his disability that had made him a target. His vulnerability had led some to believe he could be easily intimidated. "I don't know how to thank you," Jason had said over the phone, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave me my dignity back." Ivanka had assured him that it wasn't about gratitude. It was about doing what was right. And yet, the sincerity in Jason's voice had touched her deeply. She had never underestimated the value of being seen. But in that moment, she realized how much one person's actions could change the course of someone's life. The CEO, now under the watchful eye of Ivanka, had begun making real efforts to implement changes within his company. He had called in consultants and trainers to reshape the corporate culture, focusing on diversity, inclusion, and, most importantly, empathy. He also started offering additional support to disabled employees and created initiatives to help them thrive in the workplace. It wasn't a perfect transformation, but it was a step forward, an acknowledgement that there was room for growth even for the wealthiest and most powerful individuals. The initiative quickly gained traction within the company, and Ivanka was even invited to speak at a company-wide seminar about leadership and responsibility. But it wasn't just within the corporate walls that Ivanka's actions had a profound impact. News of her intervention spread beyond the confines of Trump Tower, reaching the media. It wasn't the kind of sensational story that the press often sought, but it caught the attention of a broader audience. That's when Ivanka's phone rang again. This time it was a call from her father's office, but it wasn't the usual briefings. The voice on the other end was serious, yet there was an undercurrent of something more. "Ivanka, we need you at the White House," her father's aide said. "You've become a symbol of leadership and we need your help in drafting a new initiative. There's been a lot of attention around what you did at Trump Tower. People are looking to you for guidance." Ivanka felt a wave of emotion at the recognition of her actions, but she also understood the gravity of what was being asked. She had never expected her decision to take a stand in the lobby that day to spark such widespread discussion. But now she was in a position to influence far more than just her family's business. The next morning, she found herself sitting in a roundtable meeting in the Oval Office with senior advisors, political figures, and her father. It was a surreal moment, one she hadn't imagined just days before. "Ivanka," her father said, his voice firm yet filled with pride. "You've shown the kind of leadership this country needs. We've talked about corporate responsibility, but your actions have set an example. It's time we take this initiative further." Ivanka wasn't sure what to say at first, but she found herself speaking from the heart. Leadership isn't just about what happens in the boardroom or in front of the cameras. It's about how we treat people, the ones who don't have a voice, who are marginalized. That's where true change happens. It's about dignity, respect, and creating a culture where people matter. Her father listened intently, nodding in agreement. "We've been talking about implementing stronger workplace protections, especially for disabled workers. But you've taken this beyond policy, you've shown it's about the heart of leadership. It's time we make this a national conversation." The room fell silent for a moment as Ivanka's words sank in. She realized that she was standing at the crossroads of something bigger than herself. It wasn't about advancing her career or her family's legacy. It was about leading a movement for justice, one that extended beyond corporate walls and into the everyday lives of millions of people. The initiative was born out of those conversations, a nationwide campaign for workplace equality, inclusivity, and protection of vulnerable employees. The campaign wasn't just about laws or regulations, it was about instilling values of empathy and responsibility in corporate America. Ivanka knew it wouldn't be easy and there would be resistance. But she also knew that what she had seen in Trump Tower was the beginning of something that had the potential to transform how America viewed leadership. As the press conferences rolled out and Ivanka's face appeared on television screens, there was one thing she was certain of. She had taken a stand not just for Jason, the janitor, or the disabled employees in Trump Tower, but for everyone who had ever felt invisible in the workplace. Her decision to confront the CEO in Trump Tower had gone from a personal act of justice to a nationwide call for change. It had sparked a wave of transformation in both corporate practices and in the hearts of people across the country. And as the campaign gained momentum, Ivanka continued to reflect on the moment when she had stepped into that lobby, her voice steady and strong. She had been a catalyst for change, but she hadn't done it alone. The workers, the leaders, and the citizens who rallied behind the cause were the ones who would ultimately carry the movement forward. Months passed, and the nationwide campaign for workplace equality, inclusivity, and the protection of disabled employees gathered momentum. Ivanka's role in the movement had been both a source of inspiration and a model for corporate leaders across the country. What had started as a simple act of standing up for someone who needed help had turned into a powerful catalyst for a broader conversation on justice, respect, and leadership. Ivanka had spent countless hours traveling across the country, meeting with business leaders, disability advocates, and government officials. She had spoken at conferences, been interviewed by major news outlets, and worked tirelessly behind the scenes to ensure the campaign's success. Everywhere she went, she found herself surrounded by people who had been inspired by her actions that day in Trump Tower. But despite the success, there were moments of doubt. Every change was met with resistance, and the road was never as smooth as she had hoped. Many corporations were slow to adopt the new practices, and some executives dismissed the campaign as a passing trend. However, Ivanka was undeterred. The voices of the workers, those who had long been ignored, kept her motivated. One afternoon, she received a letter that reaffirmed her commitment. It came from Jason, the janitor she had stood up for all those months ago. The letter was simple, yet its message was profound. Dear Ms. Trump, I don't know where to begin. You took the time to stand up for me when no one else did. It felt like I mattered for the first time in my life. Since that day, things have changed for me. I was given the opportunity to move up in the company, and now I'm leading a team of other disabled employees. It's hard to believe that something so simple yet so powerful could change everything for me. Thank you for your kindness, your strength, and for reminding all of us that we deserve respect. With gratitude, Jason. Reading those words, Ivanka felt a lump form in her throat. It had been her responsibility, she knew, but the reward had been immeasurable. Jason's letter was a reminder that the work wasn't about her, it was about all the people whose lives were touched by the change she had helped create. Back in Washington, Ivanka continued her work with the White House team, drafting legislation aimed at creating stronger protections for disabled workers. She had become an influential voice not just in corporate America, but in the political sphere as well. Her collaboration with disability advocates led to the drafting of a comprehensive bill that would provide tax incentives for companies that adopted inclusive hiring practices and accessible workplaces. The bill was met with bipartisan support, and by the end of the year, it was signed into law by President Trump. The law's passage marked a historic moment, one that Ivanka knew would leave a lasting legacy. But the true impact of Ivanka's actions went beyond the policy changes. It was in the quiet, everyday moments when a disabled worker was given the opportunity to lead a team, when a CEO took the time to ask how his employees were really doing, when a worker felt seen and heard, not just as a cog in a machine but as a person worthy of respect. It was a legacy built not on power, wealth, or fame, but on something much more profound: justice. The story of the confrontation in Trump Tower became a widely circulated example of how leadership could go beyond the traditional metrics of success. It was told and retold across the country by news anchors, community leaders, and even by the workers who had witnessed the shift firsthand. The story of Ivanka Trump, the CEO, and Jason the janitor became a parable of what could happen when people dared to do what was right, even when it wasn't the easiest path to take. Ivanka's actions had set a new standard for what it meant to be a leader. She had demonstrated that true leadership wasn't about being in the spotlight, but about using your influence to improve the lives of others. It wasn't about fighting to stay at the top, but about ensuring that everyone had a fair chance to rise. In the years that followed, Ivanka continued her advocacy, working with a variety of organizations to promote workplace inclusivity and fairness. She remained a passionate champion for the rights of disabled workers, ensuring that the issue never left the public conversation. Her name became synonymous with compassionate leadership, and her influence extended far beyond her family's business empire. And so, the story of that day in Trump Tower became not just a moment in time, but the start of something much larger. A movement that changed the way people thought about power, responsibility, and leadership. A movement that made sure that no one, whether disabled, underprivileged, or simply overlooked, would ever be silenced again. Ivanka's legacy was clear. In a world that often overlooked the most vulnerable, she had chosen to stand up. And that choice had set in motion a wave of change that would continue for generations to come.